Good morning, everyone, and welcome to, I believe, panel number 2, which is Social Equity and MWBE Utilization. I will be your cruise director for this morning's session. My name is Michael Clay. I am the Senior Director of Procurement and the Opportunity Programs for the Dormitory Authority State of New York, or DASNY. I'm joined for this important conversation by a panel of experts, starting to my left, Tracey Mitchell, who heads up the governor's office of mega projects across New York State. Following Tracey is Dr. Lomax Campbell, who is President and CEO of the Third Eye Network. Following him is no one who needs an introduction, Michael Gardner, Chief Diversity Officer of the MTA, and followed by Terrence Clark, who's President and CEO of the New York, New Jersey Supplier Diversity Council. So welcome to my panelists. What I would like to start off with is social equity. You know, it's a buzzword used today. What does that really mean? Our panelists are going to dissect that specific focus on MWBE utilization. How does it work? Where does it intersect? And how can social equity benefit minority and women-owned business utilization in New York State? So with that being said, I'd like to start off right away with a question to Tracey Mitchell, and then I would ask my panelists, first of all, just to do a very, very brief introduction of who they are, what they do, so that our audience knows exactly who you are. We'll start off with Tracey. Please keep it brief, because this panel of experts could go on for minutes and days about who they are and what they do. Tracey?
Great, thank you, Michael. And is it good afternoon? I think so, right?
Almost.
Good afternoon.
Almost.
Okay.
Still morning.
Still morning, all right. As Michael said, my name is Tracey Mitchell. I am the Director of Special Projects for the Governor's Office for New York State. So I oversee mega projects in New York State, like the airport, Monahan Penn Station, Javits, Belmont, World Trade Center 5, and many others, special projects for the governor. Been doing this for 20 years, started off in the mayor's office, went to the county, went to the state, and now working for the governor. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Tracey. Dr. Lomax.
All right, good morning, everybody. Good to see all of your lovely faces and everyone dressed up for us today. So up until a month ago, I served as the Mayor Lovely Ann Warren's director of the Office of Community Wealth Building in the city of Rochester, where literally my responsibility was to help Black and brown residents build generational wealth, one of the best jobs in the world. Did that 3 years, 4 months, and prior to that, spent time at Monroe Community College in the Vice President's Office for Economic Development and Innovative Workforce Services, where I was the assistant to the Vice President for the division, as well as the labor market intelligence person. So I was the geek that pulled the labor market data that worked with employers to figure out how to fill the skills gap. And so up until the November 4th, that's what I did. Currently, I'm the CEO and president of Third Eye Network, a strategic multicultural marketing and management consultancy, working in the economic development consulting space, working with municipalities and all other levels of government right now in the state of Massachusetts, doing mostly social and organizational transformation work to be more inclusive in economic development practice. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Campbell. Mr. Gardner.
Yes, good morning. I'm happy to be here with no snow. This is a great thing for Albany this time of year. So I'm Michael J. Garner. I'm the MTA's Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer. And as you know, the MTA is the largest transportation network in North America with 70,000 employees, spanning 5,000 square miles, serving 12 counties. And my staff of 60 people and I are in charge of diversity for the whole entire organization, from workforce to ensuring that once you're hired by the MTA that you have the ability to work in a bias-free environment, and then everything business. And so we have a $17.5 billion annual budget. We buy $7.5 billion in goods and services each year. and we have a $54.8 billion capital plan. And so we are great beneficiaries of President Biden's recent $1.2 trillion infrastructure program bill, and we are recipients thus far of $10.5 billion of that funding. And so we're going to make sure that the MTA has the ability of not only awarding contracts in a cost-effective manner because it's taxpayers' money is being spent, but in an inclusive manner. And if there's anything in the way of that, we are going to eradicate those barriers to entry. And from a data point perspective, we are leading the state with dollars paid to minority women-owned firms. Those numbers will be announced later on tonight. And we are happy to be here at the nation's largest MWBE conference, and our partners, ESD. We are looking forward to moving forward and executing the vision and the mission of the governor with respect to MWBE programs.
Thank you, Michael. Terrence.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Terrence Clark. I'm the president and CEO of the New Jersey Minority Supplier Development Council. It is a mouthful, so we just call it the council. We are one of the 23 councils of the National Minority Supplier Development Council. And what we basically do is several things. Number one, we certify minority businesses, and what we're certifying is that these businesses are owned, operated, and controlled by an ethnic minority or minority persons. The second thing we do is help develop these business owners so they're in a position to take advantage of the third thing we do, which is to work with corporate members. So our particular emphasis is on the private sector, primarily, but we work with corporate members to try to get minority businesses into their supply chains. Our particular organization's been in existence now for 48 years. It's part of a national group. Our particular market covers the entire state of New York, northern and central New Jersey, up to the New Jersey capital of Trenton. We have about 1,300 businesses that are certified with us. Some of them may be here today. At the same point in time, our businesses are from very small, so we have startups. The largest business that we have certified with our organization has sales of just under $12 billion. So it lets you know that minority businesses come in a variety of sizes and variety of industries. We deal with basically businesses that do business with other businesses, so we really don't deal with business to consumers. And what we look at is one simple thing, the growth and development of minority businesses. And any way that we can be involved in different projects and opportunities to get our business owners in the door, that's what we try to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Terrence. So let's jump right into this, Tracey and gentlemen. I would ask that you keep, which is going to be tough, your responses brief, because I want to try to get everyone involved, A, and B, I want to try to get through the questions. So the first question is, excuse me, what must be in place to successfully promote and achieve social equity through MWBE utilization? And since both, we've got city, local with Dr. Campbell, we've got Tracey, whose background comes through, as you've heard, through county, and Michael, of course, on the state level, and Terrence being in the private sector, kind of invoking all of this. I'm going to ask Tracey to start off with, and then I'll ask Michael, and then Dr. Campbell to follow, and Terrence for any pieces that everybody else doesn't take away your thunder, Terrence, because being last, you're following behind some heavyweights here, but let's see what we can do. Tracey?
Okay. Well, you know, working on all of these projects, infrastructure projects, the one thing that we have down pat is the construction. And I think that what would help make goals is if we focus on the professional service side. You know, oftentimes when these bids come in, they already have their team together. And we miss out on the professional services like the engineering firms, the architect, other type of professional services. And we have to find a way to engage them with these developers early on. I think that would help us achieve our goals on these projects.
So not so centric on the construction, which is always considered grown and sexy portion
Exactly.
of the spin for diversity, that it has to extend not only in professional services, but also commodities and services areas.
Right.
Michael, your take on this question.
Is that since we're guardians of taxpayers' dollars, it is incumbent upon us to make sure that we are inclusive. For example, President Biden talks about build back better, but we must build back inclusively, meaning that this $1 trillion cannot just be awarded to the larger companies who would want to avert subcontracting out their projects by giving you all kind of excuses. An effective MWBE program is going to have contract documents that's going to hold our prime contractors and consultants accountable for achieving their MWBE goals, and if not, then there's going to be some ramifications. There is an equation a formula that was created by a New York State DOT, which says that for every $1 million that's spent in capital construction, a total of 24 jobs are created and or maintained. We need to make sure that those jobs are not only being created on top, but they're going to be created at the subcontractor level and at the smaller level. So the new paradigm, Mike, is debundling projects, creating smaller packages, and then actively going out and recruiting minority women-owned businesses to bid on prime projects. Therefore, they can be in control of their own destiny and not waiting 6 months to get paid. So that's the new paradigm, debundling and creating smaller opportunities. And so that gives us the ability to further grow and develop our pool of MW and DBE firms.
Absolutely. Dr. Campbell.
Yes, thank you for that question. I would say that the Office of Community Wealth Building was a municipal innovation because we were the second office of its kind within government in the nation. The first one was in Richmond, Virginia. And literally, by design, my team saw it as the equity office, if you will, of the city, in the sense that we played the ground game. So our work wasn't sexy and glamorous in the sense of we're going out trying to attract companies here to hire, or we're working on big construction projects. No, we work with mom and pops. We were the first point of entry if you wanted to get access to capital from the city and didn't have a business plan or any of those types of things. And so I think what was different in terms of what needed to be in place was our intentionality. Our entire strategic plan centered our very community and cultivating opportunities. Our first creation was a business and community services center where an entrepreneur can come and take classes, or a potential worker can be paired up with an employer and meet on the ground for an opportunity for employment. And also too, whenever we had, undoing racism workshops or any other conferences or trainings, rather than going with the fact that the city already has standing contracts with big caterers, we explicitly looked for women and minority-owned businesses to cater our events or look for vendors to provide other services for us. So we were very intentional about how we used our budget. So I think that what needs to be in place, just to kind of wrap up the thought, Rochester passed the policy of 30% utilization for MWBEs before the state got to that point. That network of supports in those structures and offices with budgets focused on trying to meet those goals. Being intentional is very important.
Absolutely. Terrence, your thoughts?
Well, from the way we look at it, because we deal mostly with the private sector, where there really aren't any goals.
Absolutely.
So this is really about educating and changing minds. And it's really about talking about that those in procurement are looking at our business owners in the same manner they look at every other business owner. So this is not a special program. This is a program that's going to help enhance the bottom line of their business. So what we try to do is to get our particular clients and our corporate members, which are the large corporations generally, to understand that the business owners that we deal with are no different than the business owners that are in the rest of their supply chain. What they are looking for is a chance and an opportunity to show that they provide the same types of goods and services that a majority business owner provides. And that's where you have the kind of rub, because it's not only the getting that to happen, but it's getting people to change their minds about what that word minority means. Because minority in a lot of people's minds means inferior. And what we try to work on is that these are not you're not doing these people a favor. They are doing you a favor by being able to diversify your particular supply chain so that you have now different ways of doing business that may be more innovative, that are different than who you have in your supply chain, and may be more cost effective. That's what.
No, and I appreciate that perspective, Terrence, because the private sector generally follows the government. So it's been, at least heretofore now, that government leads the way in diversity and inclusion, and the private sector follows. So your perspective is very interesting, where both in the private and the public sector, that one must prove themselves and have the opportunity through programming, whether it's on the city, the state, or the county level, to at least open the doors for participation by minority and women-owned businesses. So start off with you, Dr. Campbell. What is an existing challenge you identify as key to overcoming on the path to achieving social equity?
Sure. I think one of the biggest issues we experienced was a lack of a pipeline in our community. So you change the policy, social policies matter, saying now we have an obligation to support more women and minority-owned businesses, but the infrastructure is not there. Folks aren't properly educated on the opportunities that are offered, whether it's through government, whether it's through the local colleges, whether it's through big business. So that's been the biggest challenge in our work, and then trying to create that pipeline or network of supports to help cultivate a pipeline to actually take advantage of those opportunities.
Good points. Tracey, your role, both you and Michael, the MTA having the budget and obviously going to be a recipient of the large infrastructure legislation that was just recently passed. And Tracey, for you, managing utilization and overseeing utilization on the airports and some of the P3 and the large projects, which are not in any time soon going to get smaller. They're going to be getting larger, right. Fortunately or unfortunately. Mike, with you with the third well, West Side Access, all of that, as well as new projects. What do you see as challenges, Tracey, and then Michael, in terms of MBEs and WBEs, and even service-disabled veteran-owned businesses being able to participate in these large infrastructure projects? What's the challenges that you see?
One of the challenges that I see has to deal with compliance. Mm-hmm. You know, when Article 15A was put in place, it was put in place for minorities and women to make money, mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. right? If prompt payment and people are not getting paid, that's a problem, mm-hmm. right? If people are getting shortchanged on change orders, delays with retainage, that's their profit. So compliance is a big challenge in dealing with these mega projects. And I've seen, firsthand, somebody may be owed, $1 million. And by the end of the day, they got to settle for $200,000. Well, that $800 left was their profit. Mm-hmm. So prompt payment is a big issue for me, and along with retainage and CUF and all the other areas of compliance.
Commercial useful function, yes. Absolutely. Mike, what do you see from your vantage point in terms of an existing challenge that you could identify, or challenges?
Challenges, it's twofold. So the first one, access to capital, because if our MWBEs are going to be successful, they need to have access to capital, to hire expertise, to expand their back office support. So it's capital and access. Second is an adequate network. Mm-hmm. And so I've heard many certified firms say that, well, I've been certified for 2 years and I've not gotten any work. Well, if you think someone is going to come and just drop an opportunity in your lap because you're certified, that's not going to happen. And so you must be able to get out and network. You must be able to go to the building congresses, dinners, and lunches, and breakfasts, network and migrate with people, because people do business with who, Mike? Who they know.
Who they have a relationship with.
And who they trust. Because at the end of the day, there has to be an assurance that if you're afforded a subconsultant or a subcontract opportunity, that opportunity is going to be finished safely, timely, and on budget. And we live in the Fortune 500 capital of the world, Tracey. And I know that once a firm find their niche and their network, it's a 20, 30-year run, because the prime contractors and consultants, they will come to you because they have an assurance that once they award a sub-consulting contract or subcontract to you, that you're going to come through for them.
Terrence, it's interesting from your perspective, again, working primarily, I know you do play in the public sector, but your focus of your organization has always been the private sector. What do you see for challenges for MBEs to play in the private sector in terms of challenges? The same thing that may be a little different in the public sector for Michael and Tracey, who function on the state level.
It's several-fold. Certainly, and one of the things which Michael just mentioned is that ability to network, for people to know who you are. If they don't know who you are, they're not going to do business with you. And people do business with people they know, they like, and they trust. So, that's the first thing. The second thing is really for those in the private sector to believe that businesses that are quote-unquote minority can perform. And, I keep coming back to that because I keep hearing it, that, well, this person doesn't have the capacity. This person doesn't understand how we do business. So, one of the things that we do with our corporate members is we have them put together these how to do business with. So you break down what does a vendor look like in your eyes, so that when we bring people to you to do business, that avoids that whole argument about, I don't know what this person does, so they don't know what we do. So, the thing that I've always seen, and I've been doing this kind of work for, let's say, a long time, is that people don't get the communication. I always say people need to be an eyewitness and an ear witness, which means you need to be in the room. So you don't hear what's going on from somebody else. You hear it with your own ears, and then you can kind of figure out how this works for your business. So what we try to get is people in the room. And we try to get our corporate members to match up with those people in the room. So, that I think is extremely important. As Michael mentioned, the access to capital is extraordinarily important, because once you get a contract, especially in the private sector, you might get paid 90, 100, 120, 150 days. Do you have the cash flow? Because cash flow is king and queen and jack and joker. Do you have the cash flow to be able to run your business while you're waiting to get paid? And it's not just capital, it's affordable capital. Because if I have if my profit margin is 10% and I'm getting capital at 20%, this isn't helping me. This is putting me further behind the 8 ball. And for a lot of the smaller businesses, they end up getting unaffordable capital, which just makes things worse. It may be a short-term solution, but over the long term, it ruins your business. So it's those kinds of things I think that are very important, and those are the challenges that have to be overcome for true social equity, not only in the public sector, but most importantly in the private sector. A lot of our clients made a lot of pronunciations after the death of George Floyd. Well, we're going to put up $500 million, we're going to put up $2 billion, and so forth. What we're trying to get people to do is actualize those, because it all sounds good.
Excellent point.
But it's now, how do you actually do this? And who are you actually doing this with? It's enough to say, yeah, well, because of what's going on, the social tension and unrest. I mean, the social tension's been here way before when I was born. And it ain't going anywhere no time soon. It comes out in various ways. But if you actually are going to do something, let's get a plan together as to what that's going to be, and then let's communicate that plan to the people who can benefit from it. That has not happened, by and large, since May 25th of 2020.
Excellent point, excellent point. Dr. Campbell, have you come up the rear on this question? What do you see from your vantage point as a key challenge that has happened as a result of overcoming the path to achieving social equity from your vantage point?
I think I started this question.
Okay.
And I began talking about the lack of a pipeline.
Yep.
And also, I want to tie some new things into it, but also was talking about a lack of the infrastructure or network of supports. I think education on the part of the entrepreneurs, but also on the part of the systems or the actors that support them is important. You know, we ran a major project, or we're in the process of doing it now, where I'm still connected, of trying to make sure that all of our entrepreneur support organizations in the Rochester area that focus on our companies, Black and brown companies, specifically understand that the activities that you provide in terms of support to an entrepreneur should vary based on the goals of that entrepreneur.
Sure.
So if that entrepreneur's goals is pursuing capital so they have the working capital to hire staff or cover bills while they're doing work, the things that needs to be put in place as inputs to have successful outputs looks different than if you're trying to help someone successfully get certified, registered in someone's vendor system, and ultimately secure their first contract. And so we have to move from universalistic approaches to technical assistance and capacity building programs to those that are more targeted into the different activity mixes of the entrepreneurs. And because that's not broadly understood, there's gaps.
Sure. Interesting in terms of the times we live in. We're doing this conference live, but with very few people in the audience because it's being streamed. COVID-19 has changed the way we do business, whether you're the state, whether you're a municipality, whether you're a private sector business. And so from your perspective, how has COVID impacted on the progress of social equity through MWBE utilization? And Mike, we'll start off with you.
So during COVID-19, as you know, we shut down our systems every day from 1 to 4 a.m. and disinfected all of our subway stations and trains. So we were the safest mass transit system in the nation. And just because there's an emergency declaration does not mean that MWBE firms need not to apply. And so we were intentional about going out and recruiting New York State certified MWBE firms and MTA certified DB firms to sell us COVID-19 goods, products, and services. So much so that we spent over $100 million with those firms during COVID-19. Under ordinary circumstances, we would have heard something like, since it's an emergency, we need to waive the MWBE goals. And so that request, to me, was dead on arrival. No, absolutely not. We're going to go out and we're going to find those firms, and we're going to spend taxpayers' dollars with those firms like anyone else, give them an opportunity as well. And so we did a great job in doing that, and I'm proud of the staff, and I'm proud of the organization that we were able to spend over $100 million with certified companies during that time frame.
Terrence, from your perspective, how has COVID-19 affected the private sector in terms of utilization and equity for MWBE firms to participate?
I think because people weren't in the office and people were working remotely, it gave a lot of our clients an opportunity to really think about what it is they've been doing prior to COVID-19. And what I have seen is a little more openness and transparency, because now you don't have to meet a person in a certain place. You can meet them on a Teams meeting or a Zoom meeting. So we see more participation. I've also seen at the same point in time, a lot of our clients in the private sector have been kind of level setting and right setting their particular supplier diversity programs, determining what works, what doesn't work. Mm-hmm. I've seen also at the same time, we are still working on that whole mentality thing of, can this business actually do what they say they can do? And we are doing more in the way of trying to educate our corporate members and our minority business owners as to how to come together that's going to be something that's mutually beneficial from a contract standpoint for both parties. It's worked to some extent. There's a lot more work that needs to be done. We have probably we've gained probably 40 additional corporate members since COVID-19 began, for various reasons. I think, some of it is wanting to be part of something. Some of it is they've noticed that their clientele have changed and maybe they need to get some suppliers that look like their clients. And some of it, a good part of it, at least in my viewpoint, is a reaction to the death of George Floyd, which happened during the COVID-19 pandemic. Now the question becomes, you have a lot of people saying, I want to do something, but they don't know what that something looks like. And we want to have more minority and more women and more veterans in our supply chain, but we don't know how to do that. So we've done more one-to-one education to get people to understand how that's done and how you not only make that program work from an external standpoint, but more importantly, from an internal standpoint, because supplier diversity programs work best when it's a top-down, when it's the CEO, CFO, COO versus bottom-up. So we're trying to, I've had more conversations with people in the C-suite in a lot of these corporations than I probably did before COVID-19.
Excellent point. Dr. Campbell, from your vantage point, how has COVID-19 affected MWBE utilization through social equity?
Sure. Thank you for that question. In two capacities. The first one is, on one level, it shifted our perspective because we needed to do things differently to meet women and minority-owned businesses where they were. And on another lens or aspect, it accelerated the fulfillment of our strategic plan. So case in point, prior to the pandemic, we had already begun the journey of trying to improve Rochester's entrepreneurial ecosystem. We had adopted a platform called, that we call regionally Nexus I-90 to put all of the supports for entrepreneurs in one portal so that you can find them. And in that process, we mapped, there was about 150 entrepreneur support organizations from government to nonprofit to education institutions in our Finger Lakes region. But we had only identified maybe a third of them were in the city of Rochester. We were able to get a third of that 150 listed in this resource navigator prior to the pandemic. And then when the pandemic hit, it made us think, how can we deploy resources efficiently and better coordinate this network? Because just because you put everybody in one website doesn't mean that they're efficient. It doesn't mean that they understand the unique needs of the entrepreneurs that we're trying to serve or contract with. And it doesn't mean that they've tailored what they're doing to that audience. And so we've been able to deploy about $2.5 million to invest in enhancing that ecosystem, not the digital infrastructure, but the social network of support for those businesses. And so we rolled out last November, partnering with the Rochester Economic Development Corporation, who's in the room, what we call the Resource Partner Enhancement Program. It's a 2-year peer learning cohort program where we took the entrepreneur support organizations like Urban League and Ibero, and we've invested $250,000 in them in the form of grants and executive coaching so that they can begin to embark on a transformation agenda, both independently and cooperatively, with this specific demographic of women and minority-owned businesses in mind. And so as a cohort, they have to tackle a specific type of issue like procurement, like certification, like access to capital, like hiring, like R&D for products and services, so that those businesses are more successful. And by doing that, making their services more culturally and contextually appropriate for our priority businesses.
Excellent point. Tracey, from your vantage point in looking at these mega projects, how have you seen COVID-19 affect utilization through social equity?
You would think that there were a lot of businesses that went out of business. When I go to the malls and I saw stores that have shut down, in the construction, very few went out of business. We found ourselves lending more support services. Right now, we're dealing with the aftermath, the delay claims, and if they're going to get paid for that, right? Because when New York or most of the states shut down construction work, these firms still had to pay their workers, because when it started back up, they wanted those workers still working for them. So now it's going to tell whether or not these delayed claims are going to be approved and how that's going to affect the small businesses.
No, and I think the panel has hit a home run, as they've done with all of the questions, but especially as it relates to minority and women-owned businesses and how do they navigate through COVID-19, whether it's the MTA doing the extra work and sanitizing the largest transportation system in the United States, or whether it is through C-suite conversations. How does the businesses, and you engage those corporate sponsors to really look at how they can reach out and actually do what they say they're going to do with MWBEs. You heard Dr. Campbell talk about how Rochester began to figure out how do they conceptualize going to where the businesses are, not where everyone thinks they are. And as Tracey's talking about that, you know, everybody didn't go out of business. Folk are still in business. Folks are still ready, willing, and able to work. It's just the challenge of how do we get them, especially in the large dollar value projects, how do you get those individuals armed and ready to be able to produce, because the clock is ticking, especially on these large projects. From your perspective, Tracey, what are one or two key indicators that show positive impact of progress? Because I think it's important. Conceptually, we've all talked about what we think should happen and what has been happening, but you know, people like to see positive impacts. They want to see results. I want to see contracts if I'm a small business owner. So what are some of the, from your perspective, one or two key indicators that kind of show that we're making progress on path to social equity?
You know, so when we talk about minority and women-owned businesses being inclusive and getting contracts, you know, that's a wonderful thing. But what I see is I look at the dollar. I look at the dollar values that are going to minority and women versus non, right? So I don't care that there was 100 contracts given, but what was the dollar value given to them? And one of the things on one of the projects at the bridge, the Mario Cuomo Bridge, one contractor who started off with a $3 million contract, through change orders, was able to achieve $28 million at the end of the day. That's what I like to see. You know, I don't want to see at $1,000, two of us got $100, right? So I want to look at the dollar figures, and I think that we're improving with that, but you got to start somewhere.
Dr. Campbell, your perspective on the same question.
Sure. I would start by saying that social equity requires social transformation, and that should be measured. And if you don't track it, you can't measure it. So I would say also, too, that good fortune lives at the intersection of preparation and a pipeline of opportunity. And so the two key indicators I'll touch on the preparation side, having new programs, new resources, new personnel committed to this journey, where when they've been evaluated, they're deemed capable and ready to serve the entrepreneurs. And then on the readiness side, having that pipeline, so when we can begin to go before certification and start looking at how many candidates for certification we can get in the pipeline prepared for opportunities, and even start getting them some opportunities pre-certification. Once they get certified, the number of folks we're actually getting through the new pipeline process, so you can quantify that certification status. The next one being the number of people who are functioning as subcontractors, and them reaching back and helping and mentoring folks that are just getting certified, and them reaching back and encouraging people to consider certification, and the number of folks moving from subcontractors to prime contractors, and the support along that pipeline. So preparation as well as opportunity. So measuring those two things.
Excellent point, and I think there's been underscored twice. Michael, the doctor, talking about, again, the next frontier is prime contracting. Never mind subcontracting. It's got to be prime, because that's the next frontier to grow and scale our businesses. And I think the one point that has been underscored is to create intergenerational wealth in the Black and brown community, because that has not surfaced. And to be honest with you, a lot of people, and we've all heard on this panel about, this MWBE goal stuff, it's a set aside, bad word, all the rest of that. But what you are doing is creating an opportunity for businesses and most of the entrepreneurs that all of us, private sector, public sector, local, deal with, is the fact that these are first generational businesses in the most part. So therefore, that entrepreneur has to start off to be not only the tradesperson or the architect or the engineer or the commodities and services vendor, but they've got to be the jack of all trades. So Mike, again, from you, what are the one or two key indicators that show positive impact that we're moving to the path of social equity from your perspective?
Dollars paid and job creation. And so Maggie Alston, who runs the City of New York's program, who's sitting right there, and Julie Harris, who is a beast when it comes to MWBE policy, and Mike, there's about 9 of us who convene ourselves on these Thursday morning calls, and we're starting to talk about the disparity within the disparity. And we have these calls because we wanted to make sure that all of the city agencies and state agencies were aligned when this infrastructure funding came down, to make sure that we were organized the same way that the large contractors are organized. And we had a focus on maximizing dollars paid to Black and brown companies who far often get left out. And so Mike talks about a set aside. My thing is that we need to come up at government of eradicating problems and focusing on solutions. So if there is a lack of our ability to award contracts to Black and brown companies, let's come up with strategies and solutions that's going to allow us to in fact do that. Because if you look at society, they say that, well, set aside is a bad word. It's not a bad word. We are coming up as government with programs that's going to allow Black and brown companies to enter the mainstream just like any other company, because they pay taxes too. And we're spending taxpayers' dollars. And so it is the focus on dollars paid and job creation in every community.
Absolutely. Terrence, your thoughts, and we have about a minute 30 left, so.
I'll make this quick. The thing that we look at is number of businesses that are entering new supply chains in the private sector, but also the number of businesses that got that second opportunity. Because that second opportunity means that you did well enough on the first opportunity to be considered for a second one. And that, we think, is where you begin to see the growth and development of a lot of these businesses. If they get those opportunities, then we know that we are now blunting that idea that they can't do work.
No, excellent point. And I think you've heard about the social infrastructure. You've heard the large, obviously, legislation passed in Washington. New York State is embarking on the budgetary process for next fiscal year, April 1. So even with COVID-19, we are progressing in terms of from a budgetary perspective. But we've got to be prepared, ladies and gentlemen. If you've taken one thing from this discussion, and that is you must be prepared so that when the opportunity train, as I call it, comes about, you are prepared to participate and exercise that opportunity to the greatest extent. So I'd like to thank the panelists, Terrence, Michael, Dr. Campbell, as well as, last but not least, Tracey Mitchell. I'd like to thank you all for your insightful conversation. Hopefully this was some benefit to the audience, and all of us are around throughout the remainder of the conference. So thank you very much, and stay safe.